Welcome to another Britflicks.com podcast. My name's Stuart Wright, and today's guest is ANNA CALE. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Indeed, indeed. Now, you're an arts and culture writer who specialises in classic film and TV. You have a book out called The Real Diana Doors that's available to buy from all good bookshops, as I understand it.
Absolutely, yes.
And people by just searching your name will find many an interesting article written by you. In particular, one that stood out for me was your 10 great British seaside films for the BFI.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that was great fun to write. So yeah, absolutely.
I imagine. So welcome to the show. You're going to do 3 films that have impacted everything in your adult life, a format that I've been playing with since December and having a lot of fun with, I should add. But before we do, let's talk about some of your stuff. Let's start with The Real Diana Doors. This is a question I ask a lot of documentary filmmakers when they do a documentary, where obviously you go in with a perceived idea of something and then you make a film and then you come out the other side. So I imagine when you're writing a biography, there's a perception you might enter the process with, and then there's maybe some change in that perception as you go. So what for you was the biggest surprise and or revelation once you started to concentrate on writing a book about Diana Doors that you might not have had you not gone through the process?
Yeah, so there was a lot to learn about Diana Doors. I thought I knew her and I thought I knew her work, but actually there's so many more layers to her career and to her as a person and the journey she went on as a person. So it was wonderful to be able to build that picture of her. But also for me, one of the things that really stood out was I'd seen, various things about her. I'd read there are other biographies, not recently perhaps, but certainly, in the past that there have been biographies written about her.
Yeah.
But they're all from a certain perspective. They're all, from a male perspective. And there weren't many books or articles written about her from a female perspective. And that was something I wanted to bring into that kind of study of her and her work.
Yeah. Was
a different perspective. My perspective as a woman, and now looking back on her and the social journey, that she was involved with, as well as the time she lived in was a fascinating time in British cinema, but also in British life. And she navigated that, in a really interesting way. So it was great to, I guess, kind of unpick the jigsaw around her and her work and her life. And, there'd often been focus on maybe the more salacious aspects of her personal life. Obviously in articles or books written about her. So I wanted to really dig deeper and kind of really try to get to understand her as a person and as a performer, and kind of build that jigsaw back together again, and kind of see where I got to with the research that I did. But luckily for me, Diana Doors wrote a lot herself. She was a very witty and intelligent woman, really keen to kind of get her own story out there and write herself. She wrote articles, she wrote a number of books herself as well. So it was great to kind of revisit and visit those and kind of read her own view of herself and how that changed over time. So there was loads of great source materials I could use for the book, and it was great to kind of piece that all together to give what I wanted to do is give a bit of an introduction to her as a performer, but also into her place in British cinema and as a screen star, and then kind of maybe set people off on a journey to find out more about her and her work. So if one person kind of finds her and watches some of her films as a result of reading the book, then I'm really happy, because that's what I wanted to do, is kind of, just put her story out there for people to kind of read and enjoy and hopefully find out more as a result.
Nice one. I mean, she strikes me, if I think about what I might think of her, is somebody who sort of trailblazed the kind of, the siren, as it were. She was a kind of, a Marilyn Monroe figure in a headline tabloidy way. But also she was a trailblazer on the other end as well, is that she carried on performing and acting as she matured. It didn't just stop for her then. And obviously this is a recurring thing that's still sadly discussed to this day, that there's like a shelf life for female actors. And the fact is she did actually still carry on to be present in film and TV after the glamour years, I suppose, for want of a better expression.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. She had very interesting different chapters to her career. She kept coming back. She had knockbacks, and she had kind of difficulties in terms of kind of, I guess, pursuing the career she perhaps wanted, but she kept going, she kept working. She was able to create a really interesting, nuanced career, both on screen, on cinema, and also in TV. She did a lot of TV work as well, particularly later years when she was allowed to kind of take on those character roles, and kind of maybe the focus wasn't just on, her beauty. I mean, she was a beautiful woman, very glamorous woman, and she remained so all through her life. But, there was a focus more on her acting skills, certainly from the 70s onwards. And she really kind of showed and demonstrated what a good actor she was. And it, she could have gone on to do so many other, wonderful things had she not died, obviously so young. It would have been fascinating to see what she went on to do, because I think there's so much more that she could give in terms of her acting and her personality. She was great as a chat show guest or, quiz show, whatever it was, she turned her hand to. She was great, and she obviously loved what she did. And that really came across in her performances, which is why people absolutely loved her. There's so much outpouring of love for her when I started the book, and people getting in touch and saying, "Oh, I remember on this, I remember on that." Really just genuine kind of affection for her, as a personality and as an actor.
And what when you went back over her own writing, then what was your favourite discovery of that you unearthed that you put in the book?
I think there were some books you could kind of see she was kind of maybe. She was after the salacious. So she understood how things worked. She was very savvy, and she understood what was the expectation was in terms of the kind of output she might put out there. Yeah. For example, one of the titles was The A to Z of Men, which was an interesting read. And there were other titles like that. But actually, she did 2 autobiographies.
Okay.
One when she was incredibly young. It came out, I think, in the early 60s, called Swinging Doors. And if you can get hold of a copy, it's a wonderful book. Absolutely fascinating read from a younger perspective. And, her to then, varied and interesting career. But, she was still only, 30 at that time, if that. And, she'd done so much up to that point. And that was an interesting, entertaining read. But her second autobiography, which came out in 1980, it's really interesting to kind of see her reflecting on her own career and her own journey, and kind of the different perspectives she brings kind of later on. And the 2 books side by side, it's really interesting to kind of see the difference in the approach.
Yeah, I imagine you've got, on the one hand, you've got modernism and the birth of popular culture. And I guess by 1980, we're entering the postmodern era where we're beginning to reflect on a history of popular culture.
Absolutely.
It's got like a long tail then, hasn't it, at that point? It's no longer surprising us. We're trying to manufacture it like never before, I think, by 1980.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another key interest for you in terms of writing, and we'll come across this filmmaker in your 3 selections, is Bill Forsyth. So do you want to talk about what you've been doing in terms of writing and work about him?
Yeah, so after I finished the Diana Dors book, we were still in lockdown, and we were still kind of, in the kind of the throes of all that. And I wanted another project to focus on, and I'd always wanted to write more about Bill Forsyth as a filmmaker. And one of the things, again, I kind of reflected on, there wasn't much out there in terms of kind of re-evaluation of his films, or kind of a look at his whole career. Obviously people focus on certain films, Gregory's Girl or Local Hero, which are wonderful films, absolutely, lovely examples of his work. But he's made more than that, and he's made several films which people kind of haven't noticed, or they haven't seen, or they've kind of forgotten about. So I wanted to do a bit of a kind of focus on him, but from a personal perspective. So I did it as a kind of, I guess, a series of essays initially.
Yeah.
I just kind of started writing, you start writing and you just kind of keep writing. I also did a series of podcasts as well, focusing on each of his films. So it's obviously starting with That Sinking Feeling, his first film, right through to, the latest film that he's made, which was in the 90s. He hasn't made a film for a very long time, although he says he still intends to. So I wanted to look at each of those films, get on a guest who, I knew maybe had an interest in him, or might bring an interesting perspective to those particular films, and have a conversation about, the film and what they meant to them, or, what they kind of got from watching or rewatching that particular film. And the essays, kind of, I did an essay per film, and kind of pulled them together into a little kind of, I guess, a booklet of kind of an illustrated booklet. And I worked with a wonderful illustrator called Eli Allison, who created these wonderful illustrations for each of the films to kind of bring into that illustrated book. Absolutely beautiful drawings.
Oh, fantastic.
So it was about kind of celebrating him in a visual way as well, and more
Yeah.
the feel that you get from his films, as well as kind of the written kind of form from me and my feelings towards each of those films kind of in turn. So it was great. It was a lovely project to kind of do, and I was really pleased to kind of get it out there for people to enjoy. So yeah, the podcasts obviously are available on all good podcast providers. It's called 10,000 Grains of Sand, which is a reference to Local Hero, which obviously we will talk about potentially on later.
Yeah, no, I was fortunate enough because a film I'd never seen of his just dropped on Netflix a few months back. It may even be a year back now. Comfort and Joy, which I'd never seen before.
Yeah, that's one of my favourites.
Yeah.
Best Christmas film ever, that The Comfort and Joy, I think.
Well, I was just struck by, and I guess it's one of them things again, in a way, the importance of making British cinema about British life is that looking at it now, it's a genuine social history document as much as it is a piece of history, part of the cinema canon come out of Britain. Actually, when you look at it, you get a view of British life because it's a snapshot in time, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's mid-80s Britain. It's kind of, it's an interesting looking film from that point of view. Beautifully shot. I love that film. I could talk about that film as well for ages, but I won't.
Well, look, I'll put links in the show notes to all the things that we've highlighted here. And we'll move on swiftly to 3 films that have impacted everything in your adult life. I've got the list of 3. Now, for the benefit of someone that hasn't heard this before, I'll just quickly go over the rules, and obviously for your benefit too. The rules are quite simple. We're gonna go through the 3 films, but we're only going to go through them 5 minutes at a time. So I'm going to set my timer, which is what I'm doing now while I avoid eye contact with Anna. And then when the clock gets to 5 minutes, we will hear this sound, Anna. You can hear that at your end, okay?
I can, yeah. I might ignore it though. I might keep talking.
No, plenty of people do. But it's at least a chance for me, passive aggressively, to say time's up on that film. And the most important thing is it's about making sure that we at least give core attention to each film. And that's the whole point of it, really. And it's had a little bit of fun with the Jeopardy. So I'm going to do, I can do them in the order you give them me, or I can do them in the order of the release. Which would you prefer?
Oh, goodness. The order I gave them in, I think.
Okay, cool.
Because I think that was a natural kind of progression in my mind.
Right then. Your first film on your list is Saturday Night and Sunday Morning. Do you want to tell us where that fits into your film watching life and how it had an impact on you?
Yeah, I discovered Saturday Night and Sunday Morning, I think, as my gateway to film and cinema, and kind of really thinking, wow, this is an amazing experience. It's not, I was in my teens when I first saw it, and I actually saw it. I'd read the book in my early teens. My English teacher, when I was at school, kind of latched on to the fact that I was obviously looking for more challenging reading at that age, and recommended Saturday Night and Sunday Morning to me to read. And it was a wonderful book. And as I read, I kind of started to then voraciously read all the books from that period, the kind of the kitchen sink type, angry young men books that were out there. I think I, kind of cleaned out my local library pretty quick in terms of kind of, the books that were available. And then I started to move on to watch the films. I found out the films had been made of some of the books, and started watching them. And Saturday Night and Sunday Morning was an absolute revelation to me in terms of just the way that it captured the spirit of the book, but then even more so, it's such an impactful film. It's a great story, it's very true to the book, but the performance of Albert Finney in the lead role of Arthur Seaton, which is just astounding. It's so energetic, so raw, and just like nothing that I'd ever been seen before. I think in British cinema, this was something incredibly new. It wasn't the first, of the British New Wave films, but for me, it's the most impactful and the most interesting to watch, the way it was put together. So Carol Rice, who's the director, kind of his background in social realist filmmaking and the free cinema movement, and bringing all that to the screen and really absolutely encapsulating what the British New Wave was about kind of in that film. And it's such a great story. Arthur Seaton is an absolute anti-hero, very different to any kind of kind of star of a film that you're main character in a film that you might have seen before. And it just was, a breathtaking ride, I think. And you can see the influence of it, kind of in other cinema now. The impact of that film in particular, I think, is the one that's really kind of struck a chord with people, with filmmakers as they then, approach kind of making their own films. You can see that now, right through time, from when it came out in 1960 right through to now, really, with some of the British filmmakers that are working now, and the spirit that they bring to that work, I think has really been informed by Saturday Night and Sunday Morning. I just think it's a wonderful, wonderful example of how you can really bring something new to film and really kind of just turn everything on its head. And the main performances are fantastic. Albert Finney, obviously, in that lead role, but also Rachel Roberts in a role within that film. I think she's fantastic and really, I guess, underrated star of kind of the British New Wave, right. In terms of, people focus on the men and, the kind of the male roles within that British kind of film movement. But she's wonderful. She's wonderful in this. She's wonderful in This Sporting Life as well, which obviously was a film that came out in 1963. A real underrated, wonderful actor. She's just amazing. And I think she brings a really nuanced, interesting performance to her role as Brenda in this film in particular. But those two together on the screen are just wonderful. Yeah,
I'm guessing there with that, you sort of, I guess for the popular culture at the time, it was enough of a revolution for us to have working class people front and centre being angry at the world, let alone the fact that we could say there's angry men and women in the working class culture. I mean, that, and 1960 is a really pivotal year because you've got Peeping Tom, you've got Psycho, these are British films British filmmakers are really ripping things up, aren't they?
Absolutely. But this was authentic. This was a really authentic film, from a working class perspective. I think some of the slightly earlier film, Room at the Top, is a good example of it. Was trying to get there, but it wasn't quite there. There was a kind of staginess to it that, just kind of didn't quite get to where this film did in terms of kind of having that energy, and that kind of really authentic approach to demonstrating, the realities of working class life, but not in a really downtrodden way. Arthur is absolutely enjoying himself. He's enjoying his life, and he's out there and he's just demonstrating what it was like to be a working class man with a bit of money in his pocket in 1960 or, the late 50s, early 60s. And it just, it's just, a wonderful example of how film can have a real impact, I think. Yeah, no,
it's the seeing the liberation, I think, as much as anything else, of and getting it documented, because obviously we get used to high society and middle class life all the time, still to this day, unfortunately. And the idea that if you show working, it must be toil, it must be hard. The idea that you're not just surviving, you're actually thriving. Is almost as rebellious as just the film itself,
Yeah, the rest is propaganda, as Arthur Seaton says.
Right then, the alarm has gone for 5 minutes, so moving swiftly along, but going back 2 decades to a very different type of movie, a very Hollywood movie, but with a very strong text to it, is His Girl Friday from 1940.
Yeah, so I started watching kind of the screwball comedies again in my teens. I mean, you probably tell, my teenage years were really important in terms of kind of that introduction to film and getting really excited about cinema and kind of really just watching everything, that kind of came along.
The whole point of this podcast is to tap into that rich seam of discovery.
Absolutely. And I think the screwball comedies were just like the pinnacle of what, the clever kind of right dialogue, the kind of the really clever screenplays, just the wonderful stories, the acting, the directing, everything kind of comes together on the screen in a really kind of smooth, professional way. But they're so fun, there's so much fun, so much enjoyment to be had from them. And I think from a perspective of being a teenage girl, I saw on screen, strong female characters, so strong female leads in those films. And in particular, His Girl Friday was the standout film for me. Rosalind Russell in the main role as Hildy. was just wonderful. When she came on the screen, I was just mesmerised by her and her performance. But she absolutely has equal billing with Cary Grant in this film, and that's the same, across the kind of, the rest of the kind of films in this kind of genre, I guess, is that kind of equal billing. The male female kind of, the scattergun dialogue, the kind of the way that they interact, the cleverness and the deftness in which they perform. What is really clever, interesting roles for women, and I think it was a really fascinating time for women in cinema and in film, and the wonderful performances like Russell in this film, but obviously Katharine Hepburn as well in Bring Up Baby, or some of the other films. Just wonderful examples, to kind of set. And I absolutely wanted to be Rosalind Russell in this film. She was clever, she was witty, she was really kind of like engaging. But also she was a newspaper reporter, which is what I wanted to be at that time. She was absolutely living a life that I wanted for myself. And I absolutely loved seeing this film and kind of seeing that story played out. They're just great. They're just great fun, but really intelligent as well, I think, in the way that the stories are put across. They are romantic. They're romantic films, but told in quite a different way to how I think people experience romance and romantic comedies now.
Yeah.
Things have kind of shifted, but maybe not for the better in terms of how those kind of stories are perceived. And I think, romantic comedies are incredibly important in terms of film kind of history. And, they're often underplayed and downplayed in terms of their importance. And there isn't as much study of them. There isn't as much focus, but actually they're really important for people because people engage, they see themselves, they see their own kind of stories maybe. They're a wonderful kind of way to kind of engage people in cinema. And I think often people, they kind of underestimate the impact that they can have. But I think done well, a romantic comedy is an absolutely wonderful thing.
I think unfortunately, some point I think by the 90s, the marketing people sort of ruined the idea of romantic comedy being a serious thing by using this expression, a chick flick as a way of marketing it. So suddenly it had to then play to some sort of femininity thing. I mean, it's interesting you chose this film because a filmmaker called Paige Feldman, she came on and did 5 boss bitch romantic comedies, of which this was one. And it's really interesting to think of a 1940s film being the progressive text as opposed to one from, say, 40 years later that was just kowtowing to a kind of a film for women in a film for men. You had action, you had Stallone and Schwarzenegger for men, and you had these other films for women, almost like.
Yeah. It's crazy. And it really, it needs to turn it on its head, really. These roles, Russell in this film in particular, these are strong, clever women. And, I wanted to be her and I wanted to experience romance in the way that she was experiencing it on screen. I absolutely wanted to find someone who was my equal, in terms of kind of, the witty one-liners and kind of, just having that kind of, really kind of warmth that obviously comes through from the films as well. And there's always a wonderful payoff as well, and it always ends so beautifully. There's always this wonderful coming together of the storyline and those characters, and just lovely telling of a story, in each of these films. But in His Girl Friday in particular, I just love it. The pace of it is wonderful.
Do you remember when you first saw this? Do you remember that sort of thinking this isn't normal? This is I'm seeing. The male female cast being given equal billing. Could you sense that?
Yes, because I'd seen at that stage probably some of the John Hughes films of the 80s, kind of Pretty in Pink or those kind of films, or similar films where there's a young woman, there's a young man, but the focus is on the man and the male experience. The women are often, sidelined, and even when they are the focus, it's a bit naff and it's a bit like, all she wants to do is go to the prom or get married. It's like, no, sorry, that's not for me. I don't get anything from that. But when I saw this, I was like, yeah, that's it. That's what I want. That's what I want to see. I want to see those women. They're the stories I want to focus on. It's kind of I think it's ebbed and flowed over the years. Obviously, Nora Ephron was a great writer for women and female characters, and great films. But When Harry Met Sally is a wonderful film, wonderful screenplay that kind of brings us characters. It's just lovely. And it reminds me in some ways of these films in terms of the way that he plays those characters off against each other. They're few and far between still, even now. We need a resurgence, I think, of those kind of strong female-led romantic comedies that don't just focus on dresses or whatever.
Well, I mean, there's some of the John Hughes ones now where they're just like this is just like a film about stalking. It's not.
Yeah.
There's no romance. It's just somebody determined to get someone to say yes, and you kind of go,
exactly.
okay.
Yeah.
Right then, moving into your third choice, which is also, as we've established in the preamble, is one of your specialist subjects. It's Bill Forsyth's Local Hero from 1983. Where'd you start with that? What was that as a discovery for you?
Well, this is probably the most personal of all of my choices.
Okay.
So as a film, it's a wonderful film. I love Bill Forsyth's films. It's a great film, but also it's a very personal film because this is the film that connects me to my dad.
Wow.
So it's his favorite film. And we kind of, we bond and connect through our love of this film. It's kind of played out over the years in terms of when, our relationships sometimes can be a bit up and down, and it's kind of, sometimes we don't quite get each other. But then we come back to this, and this is our anchor, this film.
Oh, amazing.
We talk about this film, we talk about Burt Lancaster. So my dad has always maintained that it's his mantra, and it'll probably be on his gravestone, that there hasn't been a decent film since Burt Lancaster died. And he's very kind of staunch in his view that they don't make films like they used to. But with the case of Local Hero, he's probably right in some ways. He introduced me to this film when I was, again, in my teens, made me sit down and watch it. As an education, it was this, and there were other things that, he'd give me a lecture on the small faces as well, and, in terms of music, and it was all that kind of thing. Yeah. But Local Hero, I absolutely loved it when I saw it. And I was probably, again, maybe 12 or 13.
Okay.
Maybe not the target audience for this film, but I the warmth and the kind of the loveliness of the story and the way that the film is made, and the characters and the cast, and it's just lovely. And it really got me interested in thinking more about Bill Forsyth's films. And I've, obviously as a result of that interest in his films, it's kind of grown over time, and I've seen them when I can. Often, his other films are not as available as Local Hero is, or Gregory's Girl. But yeah, kind of seeking out more of his work as a result. But it's this film that I always kind of come back to, and I must have seen it. I mean, I don't know how many times. It's probably the film I've seen the most, I would say, over time. And when I'm in need of comfort, or when I'm in need of maybe, kind of re-anchoring or something like that, this is the film I come back to. And kind of watch. It's magical. I think it's a magical film, both from the way it's made, and that kind of a bit of a magical realist kind of perspective on life, kind of brought into this story and into this this world that he creates in Local Hero. But also it's magical for me in terms of kind of the emotions that it brings out. And I know it's the same for a lot of people. They do genuinely have a warmth and a love for Local Hero, which you don't see, for many films, really. That real just kind of genuine love for it, I think.
Absolutely. So what is it, do you think, about Bill Forsyth as a filmmaker that he manages to pull that off? Because, I mean, to a lesser degree, but I think to the same extent, he achieves that with all the films I've seen of his. So what is it about him as a filmmaker, do you think, that he's getting so right about, I guess, about the human condition, I guess, is what...
Yeah, I think that's what it is, about the human condition. And that's the theme that I think runs through all of his films, is that kind of focus on the individual journey and the conflicts within, that person. He's very funny as well. The films are very funny, very warm, but funny in a really kind of human way. They're not condescending, they're not kind of trying to be clever. They're just, there's a genuine human warmth and kind of comedy that's created from that within them.
I think even though there's like a real drama to it, I think that a lot of what he does is he offers us hope in the stories he wants to tell. I think it's never mean spirited, is it? There's never a sense.
It's not, absolutely. It's never mean spirited. It's really there are small stories told in, sometimes in a kind of quite a small way, but actually with Local Hero, there's a kind of, it's maybe his biggest film in terms of scale, in terms of the way obviously it's shot and it was a wonderful opportunity for him, I think, to really kind of demonstrate what he could do as a filmmaker. But in every film, there is that kind of, like you say, that focus on the human condition and someone's journey through that. And the just natural human comedy, I think, kind of comes through as well. And one thing I always love, and it's particularly seen in Local Hero, are the side characters. You know, it's not just one person's journey that is the focus of the film. The film is made up of all the sum of its parts in terms of all these small elements that kind of come through. The side characters, the little kind of recurring motifs in some of his films. You know, the penguin walking around in Gregory's Girl Around the School, for example, or, you know, in Local Hero, there's, you know, the renaming of the boat every 5 minutes and the repainting, the way the locals react to, obviously, you know, the character of Matt coming into the town. Just all these little elements, which I think make it so warm and lovely and kind of a wonderful watch. And I think that's what kind of comes through in all of his films. And I wish he'd made more of them. I think it's lovely to be able to kind of focus on each one, because each one is different, brings something different. But, you know, there's a lovely kind of feel of the filmmaker through all of his films, I think.
Yeah, no, I think he ends up being a very underrated British filmmaker in the end. I mean, is he on record as saying why he's not made more films?
No, he's quite a kind of you know, he's not out there all the time. He's quite a quiet man. You know, he's kind of just living his life, and, you know, kind of occasionally he'll reemerge and maybe. I guess
it's a bit in a way, it's a bit like Terence Davies in Liverpool, isn't he? In that sense, then.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, but yeah, just I mean, Housekeeping is a beautiful film, and I know I'm focusing on Local Hero in this conversation, but Housekeeping is just beautiful. A wonderful telling of a beautiful book, and really underrated. And I wish more people had seen that film.
Yeah, including me. You know, I'll have to add myself to that list.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely have to seek it out. It's hard to find out sometimes, but it was reissued a couple of years ago on Blu-ray, and it's beautiful. And yeah, he's got a lovely eye, you know, kind of for what makes a good human story and a good human centered film. But yeah, I wish he had made. There were some films maybe he maybe shouldn't have made towards the end of his career, you know, maybe kind of if he'd had more opportunities that he might have kind of sought out, you know, and kind of worked on other things. But yeah, he's a great example of a quietly unique filmmaker.
Well, I'm glad to shine a light on him for the people that listen to this podcast who might not have had him at the front and centre of their mind. I'll just run through your three films. So it's Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, 1960, His Girl Friday, 1940, and Local Hero, 1983. Yep. Your book, The Real Diana Doors, is available in all good bookshops. And your Bill Forsyth podcast is called what again?
It's called 10,000 Grains of Sand. 10,000
Grains of Sand. I will put links in the show notes to all that. And it just gives me to say thank you very much for giving your time on the Britflicks podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been great.
My pleasure.